At the dinner where I was being honored for my charity work, my father stood up, introduced my sister to the table as my daughter, and then gestured to me, the actual honoree, and said, "And this is the other one." The table fell silent. I smiled, accepted my award, and began my speech with, "I'd like to thank the people who actually showed up for me." The room gave me a standing ovation. My father left before dessert. That moment at the head table wasn't an isolated slip of the tongue. It was the public, crystallized version of a story that had been writing itself in silent ink for my entire life. I am that other one. And for 28 years, I had been trained to believe that my role was to stand quietly in the shadow of my sister, the real daughter. But that night, with a room full of strangers as my witness, a single question finally broke through. What happens when the backup plan stops waiting for a starring role that was never meant for her? To understand how a father could introduce his own daughter as the other one, in front of a room full of people, you have to go back to the beginning, to a house that looked perfect from the curb. We had the green lawn, the holiday wreath, the family photos in matching sweaters. But inside, there was an unspoken hierarchy written into every interaction. My sister, Elise, was the family's heart. I was its utility. The rules weren't announced. They were demonstrated. When I was 9 and broke my wrist falling from a tree, my mother sighed about the emergency room copay. When Elise got a splinter the same week, it was a bedtime story about bravery and a new stuffed animal. My A+ papers got a good job sticky note. Elise's participation ribbons were framed. No one ever said we love her more. They just showed it, in what they celebrated and what they treated as an inconvenience. Birthdays made the division a ceremony. For Elise's 16th, there was a surprise car, used but shiny with a big bow. For mine, a new winter coat because my old one was fraying, and a card that said, "We know you'd rather pick something practical yourself." They were right. I had learned to prefer necessities because surprises were never for me. If I looked hurt, the answer was a script I could recite by 12. "You're so independent, sweetie. You don't need the fuss." It was a compliment designed to make my disappointment feel like a personal failure. At high school, the geography of our home told the story. Elise's room was a museum of her potential, posters for art schools, shelves of new books, a constant rotation of clothes. Mine was tidy, sparse, a place to sleep and study. My father's eyes would light up discussing her future. "Elise is so creative, she's going to do something big." When my name came up, the tone shifted to logistics. "She's resilient. She'll land on her feet." I was not a dream to be nurtured. I was a problem already solved. I found my first witness in my high school biology partner, Leo. He was the one who noticed my parents never came to parent-teacher conferences for me, only for Elise's choir concerts. He saw me check my bank balance before agreeing to get pizza. One day, after my family left a science fair before my project was even judged, he didn't offer pity. He just said, "You know this isn't how it's supposed to be, right?" I shrugged. It was all I'd ever known. But the word "supposed" stuck with me, a tiny crack in the reality they'd built. College was the assumed escape, but they made it clear the investment was elsewhere. Elise's acceptance letters were met with restaurant dinners and discussions about dorm decor. My scholarship to a state school came with a printed list of student loan links and a speech about financial responsibility. My father said, "This is a great opportunity for you to build character." I packed my own bags, bought a Greyhound ticket, and realized they had given me the ultimate training: how to build a life with no help at all. University was a shock of anonymity that became a mercy. No one knew I was the other one. I was just a name on a roster, but the flip side was a relentless, exhausting pressure. If I stumbled, there was no net. I worked 2, then 3 jobs: library assistant, campus tour guide, late-night data entry for a professor. I watched care packages from home flood the dorm for other students. My phone stayed silent. My family's updates were digital. Photos of Elise's semester abroad, of family vacations I wasn't invited to, of the new sunroom added to the house. I scrolled, I worked, I repeated my new mantra. They chose her. Now I choose me. The turning point, the first real fracture, happened in my junior year. I'd been nominated for a prestigious community service award for tutoring at a local youth center. It was a big deal with a ceremony. I mentioned it to my mother in a rare phone call. Her response was, "That's nice, honey. Don't let it distract from your grades. You need those to keep your scholarship." Then she spent 10 minutes detailing Elise's latest art project. I hung up and stared at the wall. The message was clear. My achievements were risks to manage. Elise's were jewels to display. I won the award, I didn't tell them, but a local paper ran a small piece with my picture. A week later, my father called. He didn't lead with congratulations. He said, "I saw that article. Your mother and I were thinking Elise is starting a nonprofit art initiative for kids. It's a passion project. Since you're already good at that volunteering stuff, you should come home this summer and help her get it organized. It'd be a great family project." My volunteering stuff, the 300 hours I'd logged, was now a skill set to be conscripted. My award was not an achievement to celebrate, it was a resource to exploit. That was the first time I said no, not a dramatic shout, but a quiet, firm refusal over the phone. "I have an internship lined up here," I said. "It's paid." The silence was thick. "Paid," he repeated, as if the concept was alien when applied to me. "Helping your sister is more important than a paycheck," he said. "Family doesn't keep score." But they had been keeping score my whole life, and I was finally adding up the columns. I didn't go home that summer. I stayed, I worked, and I began, for the first time, to build something that was entirely mine. After graduation, I moved to the city and channeled every ounce of that trained independence into a nonprofit focused on literacy. It was grueling, long hours, grant writing, coffee-fueled outreach, but it was mine. For 2 years, I built it in the quiet without their eyes on me. They rarely asked about it. When they did, it was, "How's your little volunteer group?" Meanwhile, Elise's art initiative, which they had funded and promoted, fizzled out within a year. The subject was never brought up again. Then my work caught a break. We secured a major grant, then another. Our programs expanded. We were featured in a national magazine. That article led to the invitation, the Metropolitan Community Foundation's annual awards dinner. I was to receive the Emerging Visionary Award, a black tie event, 300 guests, a speech. Part of me wanted to keep it quiet, to protect this sacred thing I'd built from their gaze. But a bigger, wounded part wanted them to see it. To sit there and witness a room full of strangers valuing me in a way they never had. I sent the formal invitation to my parents' house. My mother called. "This is quite fancy," she said, her voice unsure. "We'll have to see if your father can get the time off." "No, we're so proud." No immediate yes. A week later, she confirmed they would come. Elise was coming too. The tone was of people fulfilling an obligation, not celebrating a triumph. The night of the dinner, I stood in my hotel room, wearing a black dress I'd saved for months to buy, looking at a version of myself I'd built from the ground up. I was nervous, but it was a clean nervousness. This was my world, my achievement. As the car pulled up to the Grand Hotel, I took a deep breath. I had no idea that in less than an hour, my father would look at the daughter he'd driven to the event, and the daughter being honored on stage, and finally say the quiet part out loud to a table of 8 stunned strangers. But before he did, he would first have to sit through the cocktail hour, watching as other people, foundation heads, philanthropists, community leaders, shook my hand and called me an inspiration. He would have to listen to them praise the very independence he'd always used as an excuse for his neglect. And in that room, surrounded by the tangible proof of my worth, something in him would snap. The cocktail hour was a quiet unraveling. I watched my father from across the room, a glass of champagne untouched in his hand, as person after person approached me. A senior board member clasped my shoulder and said, "Your work is changing lives." A major donor told me, "We need more leaders like you." Each interaction was a mirror held up to a version of me he'd never acknowledged. I saw him watching, his smile growing tighter, his posture more rigid. He was not proud. He was besieged. My mother fluttered between us, making strained small talk with my colleagues. Elise stayed glued to her phone, occasionally looking up to scan the room with a detached curiosity, as if she were at a gallery opening for an artist she didn't particularly like. The chasm between the world I'd built and the family I came from was now a physical space in that glittering room, and we were all standing in it. We were seated at table 7, near the front. My place card was at the head next to the foundation's director. My family was arranged to my left, my mother, then Elise, then my father at the corner, slightly turned away, as if angled for a quick exit. The dinner began with speeches from dignitaries. Each mention of my nonprofit, each statistic about the children we'd helped, landed at our table like a stone dropped in still water. I could feel the waves of my father's discomfort. It was during the salad course that the table's conversation turned to introductions. The woman to my right, a veteran philanthropist named Diane, led it. "We're all so thrilled for you, dear," she said to me. Then, kindly, she turned to my parents. "And you must be so incredibly proud. Tell us, what was she like as a girl?" My mother opened her mouth, but my father spoke first. He put a hand on Elise's shoulder. "Well," he said, his voice a practiced, hearty tone I knew from business gatherings. "This is my daughter, Elise. She's an artist, a real creative spirit. Just got her work featured in a downtown gallery." He beamed at her. Elise gave a modest, polished smile. Diane nodded politely, her eyes flicking to me, then back to him, waiting. He didn't stop there. He launched into a story about Elise's childhood art projects, about how she'd always seen the world differently. My mother nodded along, adding soft details. The other 6 people at the table listened, their smiles becoming confused. They kept looking at me, the honoree, sitting silently in my designated seat of honor. Finally, he finished his anecdote. There was a beat of awkward silence. Diane, ever diplomatic, cleared her throat. "And your other daughter," she prompted gently, gesturing toward me. That's when he turned. He looked right at me, seated in the spotlight he'd spent the last 5 minutes ignoring. He gave a small, dismissive wave of his hand, a casual, offhand flick of the wrist. "And this," he said, his tone dropping from proud to perfunctory, "is the other one." The table froze. Forks hovered. Smiles vanished. The words didn't echo, they absorbed all other sound, leaving a vacuum of pure, stunned silence. The other one. Not my name, not my daughter, the honoree. I was a categorical afterthought, the remaining entry on a list. In that moment, 28 years of being the backup plan, the steady one, the independent one, crystallized into a single public label. I felt the heat shoot up my neck. My hands, under the table, gripped the fabric of my dress. I saw my mother's eyes widen in panic. Elise looked down at her plate, a faint blush on her cheeks. My father's expression didn't change. He said nothing he didn't believe. He'd just finally said it in front of witnesses who didn't share his reality. Diane recovered first. She reached over and placed her hand firmly over mine on the tablecloth, a gesture of solidarity. She looked my father dead in the eye and said, with a chill that could frost glass, "How extraordinarily unfortunate to phrase it that way. We are here tonight to celebrate this one asterisk." The emphasis was a blade. The table erupted in a low murmur of agreement, of shock. My father's facade cracked. He saw the judgment in their eyes, the collective recoil. He had meant to put me in my place. Instead, he had exposed himself. The next 20 minutes were a blur of excruciating tension. The main course was served, but the meal was ashes. Conversation was stilted, directed only at me or Diane. My family was an island of silence in a sea of muted disapproval. My father drank his wine in quick gulps. I said nothing. I just let the reality of it settle. The final veil was gone. There was no pretending anymore, not even for appearances. Then it was time for the awards. The host took the stage, describing the Emerging Visionary Award. She spoke about resilience, innovation, and unshakable commitment to community. She told a condensed version of my story, the founding of the literacy nonprofit, the grants, the impact. With each word, I felt my father shrink beside me. This was the quantifiable proof, the evidence he could not dismiss. And so, it is my profound honor to invite to the stage. This was it, the moment I'd worked for, the moment they'd been forced to witness. I stood up. The entire room erupted in applause. As I walked to the stage, the sound was a physical force at my back. I climbed the steps, shook hands with the host, and turned to face the 300 people on their feet. My gaze found table 7. My mother was crying silently. Elise was clapping slowly. My father was staring straight ahead, not clapping at all, his face a mask of stone. The applause died down. I adjusted the microphone. I looked out at the sea of expectant, supportive faces. Then I looked back at my family. The words I had prepared, the gracious, professional speech, evaporated. Something truer, something raw and necessary, rose in its place. "Thank you," I began, my voice clear and steady in the silence. "I'd like to start by thanking the people who actually showed up for me." Another wave of applause, louder this time, understanding. I waited for it to subside. The people who showed up in cramped community centers to learn to read. The people who showed up to volunteer their time, their expertise, their hearts. The people in this room who showed up with funding, with belief, when it was just an idea on a scrap of paper. You showed up. And that is the foundation of everything we've built. I could see my father's jaw working from across the room. We talk a lot about building things, I continued. Buildings, programs, legacies. But the most important thing we build is our own sense of worth. And sometimes, you have to build that alone, brick by brick, while the people you hope will bring the blueprints are busy building monuments to someone else. The room was utterly silent, hanging on every word. This was no longer just an acceptance speech. It was testimony. For a long time, I was told my independence was my greatest strength. And it is. But it's a strength forged in the absence of choice. When no one offers you a seat at the table, you learn to build your own table. And then you learn to fill it with people who don't need to be asked to pass the bread. A ripple of laughter, warm and affirming, moved through the crowd. This award isn't just for the work. It's for the journey. For every silent bus ride, every unpaid invoice I covered myself, every time I had to be my own cheering section. It is proof that you can start with nothing but your own conviction and build a house that stands. You can be introduced as an afterthought in one breath, and in the next, be called a visionary. I looked directly at my father then. He held my gaze for a second, then looked away, down at the tablecloth. So, to anyone out there building their own table, sanding the edges alone, know this: your worth is not a category. You are not the other one. You are the architect. And the view from where you're building is worth every single step of the climb. Thank you. I stepped back from the mic. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then the room exploded. The standing ovation was instantaneous, a thunderous wave of sound and motion that swept from the front to the very back of the ballroom. People were whistling, cheering, crying. It was a catharsis for me and, I think, for everyone who has ever felt overlooked. From the stage, I watched Table 7. My mother was standing, clapping through her tears. Elise stood too, a stunned look on her face, clapping slowly. My father did not stand. He remained seated, a rigid dark figure amid the rising crowd. He looked up at me on the stage, surrounded by light and adulation, and I saw it finally break through his stone expression. Not pride, not anger, but a profound, bewildering loss. He had lost the narrative. The story he'd told himself for 28 years. That I was content in the shadows, that my achievements were modest, that his favoritism had no consequence, was lying in ashes at his feet, burned down by the applause of 300 people. The ovation lasted a full minute. When I finally left the stage, I was enveloped by well-wishers. Hands reached out to touch my arm, voices poured congratulations into my ears. By the time I made it back to Table 7, my father's chair was empty. His napkin was crumpled on his plate. My mother, her face pale, leaned over and whispered, He went to get some air. But his coat was gone from the cloakroom check. Elise just shrugged, avoiding my eyes. The message was clear. He couldn't stomach the sight of my victory. The punishment for my public vindication was his absence. The rest of the dinner passed in a surreal haze. Dessert was served. Coffee was poured. People came by the table to congratulate my mother, who accepted the praise with a fragile smile. I performed the role of gracious honoree, but my mind was back in that silent moment after his words. The other one! The 3 syllables that had finally broken the dam. Later, as the event wound down, Diane found me. She took both my hands in hers. Her eyes were fierce. What you did up there, she said quietly, was not just give a speech. You reclaimed a narrative, never let anyone make you a footnote in your own life story. She handed me her card. Call me next week. We have more work to do. It was the beginning of a mentorship that would change everything, but in that moment, it was a lifeline thrown by a witness. We took a car back to my hotel. The silence in the backseat was heavier than any argument. My mother stared out the window. Elise scrolled on her phone, the glow lighting her blank face. I replayed the night, not as a triumph, but as an autopsy. The public death of a fantasy, the fantasy that if I just achieved enough, worked hard enough, became enough, they would finally see me. When we reached the hotel, my mother turned to me in the lobby. She tried to hug me, but her body was stiff. It was a lovely speech, dear, she whispered, her voice cracking. He's not good with emotions. The old excuse trotted out to mop up the mess. I just nodded. I was too tired to fight. They went up to their rooms. I stood alone in the ornate lobby, the adrenaline finally draining away, leaving a cold, clear emptiness. I had won. I had my standing ovation, my award, my validation from the world. And I had finally, irrevocably, lost the father I'd spent a lifetime hopping for. The trade was brutal, and it was final. But as I rode the elevator up to my quiet room, a strange feeling began to seep through the numbness. It wasn't happiness. It wasn't even relief. It was sovereignty. For the first time, my worth was defined by a room full of standing strangers, not by the empty chair at my family's table. He had left before dessert. But I was just beginning to taste what freedom really meant. And that taste, bitter and sweet all at once, was mine alone. The silence after the awards dinner didn't last. It was replaced by a different, more complicated noise. The morning after, my mother knocked on my hotel room door. Her eyes were puffy. She didn't mention the speech or the empty chair. Instead, she handed me a small gift bag. "We're so proud," she said, the words sounding rehearsed. Inside was a generic silver pen set. The receipt, accidentally left in the bag, was from the hotel gift shop, time-stamped 9:15 that morning. A last-minute, duty-bound purchase. It was the perfect, pathetic symbol of everything, an obligation fulfilled too late, with no thought behind it. My father was already gone. He'd taken an early flight home. Elise left with my mother later that afternoon, offering me a stiff, one-armed hug. "It was a good party," she said, as if summarizing a corporate event. And then I was alone, in a quiet hotel room, holding an award and a cheap pen. But the world outside that room was already shifting. My phone started buzzing before I'd even ordered coffee. Texts from colleagues who'd seen the speech via social media clips. "You were magnificent. That was iconic." The video, it turned out, had been filmed by several attendees and was making quiet rounds. By Monday morning, my professional inbox was flooded. Not just congratulations, but inquiries. Organizations wanting partnerships. Media outlets requesting interviews. Diane, true to her word, emailed a detailed proposal for a joint citywide literacy initiative with major funding attached. The standing ovation was still echoing, and it was opening doors I hadn't even known were there. My family, however, had retreated into a familiar fortress of silence. For 2 weeks, I heard nothing. Then, a text from my mother. "Your father isn't angry. He's hurt. He feels you embarrassed him on purpose." The inversion was breathtaking. My public moment of vindication was being rewritten in their narrative as a deliberate, personal attack. I didn't respond. The energy it would take to argue facts with someone committed to a fiction was energy I needed for the real work now exploding in front of me. That work became my anchor. The nonprofit's profiles skyrocketed. We hired 3 new staff members. I was invited to speak at conferences. In every green room, at every dinner, people would pull me aside, not to talk about literacy rates, but to whisper their own version of the story. My mother always favored my brother. I was the scapegoat. "I heard your speech and cried in my car." The award had been for community service, but the speech had somehow spoken to a different, more private community. The community of overlooked children, now grown, who recognized the sting of being the other one. It was during this whirlwind, about 3 months after the dinner, that the past decided to knock. Not my parents, but my cousin Jacob, who I hadn't seen in years. He was in town for a conference and asked to meet for a drink. Jacob had always been an observer, quiet at family functions. Over beers, he made small talk before steeling himself. "Look," he said, "what your dad did at that dinner, it's all anyone's talking about back home, but not in the way you think." He explained. My father, instead of being shamed, had spun the tale. In his version, told at the country club and to relatives, I had become the ungrateful, flashy daughter who'd used a charitable event to show up her hardworking family. He claimed my speech was a calculated, bitter ambush, that I'd always resented their support of Elise's artistic dreams and had seized my 15 minutes to punish them. The other one, comment, was being minimized to a poor choice of words, taken out of context by a room of elitist strangers. I felt a cold laugh bubble up. He wasn't hurt. He was doing damage control. He was rebuilding the narrative where he was the wounded patriarch and I was the rebellious upstart. The truth was inconvenient, so he was fabricating a new one, and my extended family, trained over decades to see me as the steady, unemotional one, was primed to believe him. "There's more," Jacob said, looking uncomfortable. "He's saying the only reason you got that award is because you networked with the right people, that it's a political thing, not a real achievement. He's telling people your nonprofit is, well, he calls it a glorified tutoring service." The audacity was a clean, sharp pain. He wasn't just denying my feelings, he was actively working to discredit my life's work, to poison the well of my achievement so no one could drink from it. This was beyond favoritism. This was sabotage. I thanked Jacob for the warning. The next day, I did something I'd never done before. I hired a public relations consultant, not for the nonprofit, but for me. "I need to be bulletproof," I told her. "Professionally, publicly. Assume there will be a coordinated effort to undermine my credibility." It felt drastic, paranoid even, but it was the logical extension of a lifetime spent building a dam against a flood of indifference. Now the flood had turned toxic, and I needed stronger walls. A month later, the flood found a new channel. I received a formal letter from a law firm representing my parents. It wasn't a lawsuit. It was a cease and desist. The letter claimed that my public statements and conduct following the Metropolitan Community Foundation Awards dinner had caused significant emotional distress and reputational harm to my parents. It demanded I issue a public retraction of my speech, specifically the defamatory implication that they had failed to support me, and that I refrain from discussing family matters in any future public forum. I read the letter 3 times, sitting in my office, the sheer grotesque legal theater of it. They were using their lawyer, to try to officially silence me, to force me to call my own lived truth a lie. The cost of their hurt feelings was my voice. This was the wait, it gets worse moment. The private rejection had gone public, the public rejection had gone legal. The stakes were no longer emotional, they were now professional and financial. A defamation claim, however frivolous, could scare off donors, sink partnerships. My hands were shaking, but my mind was clear. I forwarded the letter to my new PR consultant and to a lawyer a colleague recommended. The response was swift. My lawyer's letter in return was a masterpiece of cold, legal scorn. It outlined the truth of my financial independence since 18, listed the public records of their financial support for Elise's ventures, and noted that a speech expressing personal gratitude was protected speech. It concluded with a line that made me shiver. "Any further attempts to intimidate or silence our client will be met with a countersuit for abuse of process and intentional infliction of emotional distress." The legal standoff created a frozen, terrible peace. No more letters, just silence. But the battlefield had been drawn in legal filings, and the family was now officially a war zone. It was in this icy calm that the most unexpected grenade landed. A package arrived at my office, no return address. Inside was a small, worn leather journal. A note clipped to the front read, "Found this going through old boxes in the attic. Thought you should have it. A friend of the family." The handwriting was my Aunt Meredith's, my mother's older sister, the one who'd always given me books for my birthday. The journal was my mother's, from the year I was born and the year after. With a sinking heart, I began to read. The early entries were what you'd expect: exhaustion, joy, baby milestones. But then entries about my father's disappointment that I wasn't a boy, his distance, the pressure to try again quickly. Then the pregnancy with Elise, the entries changed. They became breathless, full of hope. "He's already talking about her taking over the business one day," one entry said, when Elise was still in the womb. "He says this one feels different, special." The entry from the day they brought Elise home from the hospital was the pivot. My mother wrote. "He looked at Elise and his whole face softened. He looked at Mallory in her bassinet and said, 'Well, we'll have to make sure the older one is tough. She'll need to look out for herself.'" It was meant to be practical, I think, but it felt like a sentence. A sentence, passed on the day her sister came home. The foundational myth of my independence wasn't born from my resilience. It was assigned to me at 2 years old because my gender had been a disappointment, and my replacement had already been crowned. My role was not an accident of personality. It was a deliberate, early family policy. The later entries were a chronicle of that policy in action. Notes about buying Elise nicer clothes because she's the baby and it matters more for her. About how my father would hold Elise for hours but hand me back to my mother when I cried. The journal ended abruptly when Elise was about 3, as if my mother couldn't bear to keep recording the evidence. I closed the book, the room spinning. This wasn't just favoritism. This was an origin story, a blueprint for neglect written in real time. The other one wasn't a category I'd earned. It was a role I'd been cast in before I could talk. The shock wasn't in the revelation, I'd lived it, but in seeing the cold, written calculation behind the warm, lived pain. My mother had been a witness, a scribe, and ultimately a collaborator. I didn't confront them with it. The journal was not a weapon, it was a decoder ring. It explained the unshakable bedrock of their dynamic. My father's favoritism wasn't just a preference. It was an identity, rooted in his own flawed dreams. My mother's compliance wasn't just weakness. It was a survival strategy in a marriage where her value was tied to producing the right kind of child. Armed with this terrible clarity, I made a decision. I would not fight them in the past. I would outbuild them in the future. I doubled down on my work. The joint initiative with Diane launched, becoming a model for other cities. I wrote an op-ed about equitable funding for community nonprofits that landed on the front page of the Sunday business section. My father's whispers about glorified tutoring couldn't compete with national recognition. And then, the final, ironic twist. 8 months after the awards dinner, I was invited back to the Metropolitan Community Foundation, not as an honoree, but as a keynote speaker for their annual gala. A featured, paid speaker. The invitation specifically asked me to expand on the themes of building your own table. The foundation's director told me on the phone, "Your story resonated more than any statistic we've ever presented. People are still talking about it." I accepted, and this time I didn't send an invitation home, but I knew they'd hear about it. The circle was closing. The other one was being invited back to the main stage, this time by popular demand. The narrative was now firmly, publicly mine. The night before that speech, I sat in my apartment, looking at the 2 objects on my coffee table, the Emerging Visionary Award and my mother's old journal. One represented the future I'd built despite them. The other contained the ancient history of why I'd had to. I had survived the private neglect, the public humiliation, the legal threats, and the psychological unmasking. I had the truth, and I had the platform. But as I looked at the journal, a final, unsettling question formed. Now that I understood the why with such brutal clarity, what was I supposed to do with it? Forgiveness felt like a surrender to the old rules. Continued war felt like a life sentence. There had to be a third path, a way to step out of the story they wrote and fully into the one I was creating. And I realized the answer wouldn't be found in reacting to them anymore. It would be found in the words I chose to say to a room full of people tomorrow night, and in the life I chose to live after I walked off that stage for the second and final time. Walking into the foundation gala for the second time, I felt the ghost of the first evening hovering in the chandelier light. The room was the same. The air was the same. But I was not. I wasn't the honoree nervously hoping her family would see her. I was the keynote speaker they'd paid to hear. My seat was at the head table again, but this time, the place cards to my left and right bore the names of CEOs and philanthropists, not family members. The empty chairs where they had sat were a physical relief. Diane found me before the speeches began. She squeezed my arm. "No mercy tonight," she said, her eyes glinting. "Just truth." I knew what she meant. This wasn't about revenge. It was about sovereignty, claiming the story so completely that no one else's version could stick. When I was introduced, the applause was warm, knowing. Many in the room had been there the first time. They remembered. I stepped to the podium, looked out, and didn't scan for familiar faces. I knew they weren't there. "A year ago, I stood on a stage like this and talked about building your own table," I began. "I talked about it in the past tense, as something you do when you have no other choice. Tonight, I want to talk about what happens after the table is built. After the wood is sanded smooth and the chairs are filled with people who chose to be there." I spoke about the work, the expanded literacy programs, the tangible results. I shared data, stories of kids, the mechanics of change. It was a professional, powerful speech. And then, toward the end, I pivoted. But a foundation in construction isn't just about what you build on top of it. It's also about what you seal beneath it. The unstable soil, the old rubble, the things that couldn't support weight. In our lives, we have foundations too. Some are poured for us: family, circumstance, the messages we receive before we have filters. And sometimes you discover that foundation is cracked. Not out of malice always, but out of human frailty. Out of disappointment, or unmet dreams, or a story someone else needed to tell. I could feel the room's attention sharpen. This was the territory they remembered. When that happens, you have two choices. You can spend your life trying to repair the original, faulty foundation, digging around in the dark, getting covered in dust. Or you can pour a new foundation, right beside the old one. You can transfer the weight of your life, beam by beam, onto something level and solid that you made yourself. The old foundation doesn't disappear. It just becomes archaeology, a site you visit to understand history, not a place you live in. I paused, letting it sit. A year ago, I was introduced as the other one. It was a label that tried to make me a category in someone else's story. Today, I'm introduced as a speaker, a director, a founder. Those are roles in a story I'm writing. The journey from one to the other isn't about changing someone's mind. It's about changing your own address, moving out of the house of their expectations and into a home built on your own terms. The applause that followed was different from the standing ovation. It was deeper, more resonant, less about shock and more about recognition. I had given them the next chapter, not just the climax. The aftermath of that second speech was quiet but profound. No legal letters, no frantic family gossip relayed by cousins, just a steady, solid advancement in my career. The foundation offered me a permanent advisory seat. New funding streams opened. The glorified tutoring service was now a cited model in policy papers. And then the first surprising shift. It came from Elise. A week after the speech, an artisanal courier package arrived at my office. Inside was a small, abstract ceramic vase, glazed in deep blues and golds. It was beautiful, fragile, and clearly expensive. The card, in her precise handwriting, said, "I saw a recording of your talk. This reminded me of your line about new foundations. No strings, no ask. E." I turned the vase in my hands. It was the first gift she'd ever given me that wasn't a hand-me-down or a joint family present. It felt like a white flag, or perhaps a signal from one prisoner to another that she saw the walls of our shared jail, too. I didn't know what to do with it, so I put it on my bookshelf, a beautiful, complicated object that held no memories, only a question. My mother began to call, not about family drama, but with timid, practical questions. "I'm volunteering at a library," she said one afternoon. "They have some adults learning to read. Do you have any materials you recommend?" It was a covert olive branch, a way to connect through the only channel she had left, my work. I emailed her resources. She wrote back a simple thank you. It was the start of a new, fragile, and purely practical relationship. We were learning to be acquaintances who shared a past, not combatants in a war. My father remained a silence, but silence, I learned, can be a form of communication, too. His was the silence of a fortress that has realized it's under no further siege. The war was over. He had lost, and his refusal to acknowledge it was his only remaining form of control. The final and most profound surprise came 6 months later. I was clearing out a storage unit, finally ready to let go of the physical detritus of my old life. In a box of college textbooks, I found a folder. Inside was every report card, every award certificate, every Dean's List letter from my entire academic life, from elementary school to graduate school. I had packed them away years ago, unable to look at the proof of effort that had gone unnoticed. Sitting on the concrete floor, I flipped through them, and then I saw it. On every single one from 3rd grade onward, in the faint, pencil-written signature line for parent guardian, was my father's unmistakable handwriting. He had signed everyone. He had seen every A, every honor roll notation, every scholarship offer. He had held each piece of paper, put pen to it, and returned it to me without a word. All those years I thought he hadn't seen, but he had. He had seen and chosen, actively and repeatedly, not to celebrate, not to encourage, not to invest. The evidence of my worth had passed through his hands, and he had filed it away as administrative trivia. The neglect wasn't blindness. It was a conscious, continual decision. That was the true closure. The final loop snapped shut. The question of did he know was answered. He knew. He always knew. The foundation of his indifference wasn't ignorance. It was a choice. And seeing that fully and clearly released me from the last clinging hope that someday he'd get it. He got it. He just didn't value it. I didn't feel angry. I felt free. The burden of making him understand was gone. He had understood all along. I closed the folder. I didn't keep it. I placed it in the recycling bin along with old notes and broken furniture. It was archaeology. Interesting to study once, but not something you build a life on. Today, my life looks nothing like the one predicted for the other one. I run an organization that serves thousands. I have a circle of friends who are family in every way that matters. I buy myself flowers every Friday. The relationship with my mother is cordial, limited, and on my terms. Elise and I exchange birthday texts. My father and I do not speak. And that is not a tragedy. It is a geographical fact. We live in different emotional countries. The man who introduced me as an afterthought at an awards dinner is a character in my origin story, not the author of my current one. The standing ovation wasn't the end of the story. It was the sound of the first wall of the old foundation crumbling, making space for me to pour my own. So, if you are holding your own folder of unseen achievements, if you're nursing the wound of a parent's choice, if you've been introduced as the supporting character in someone else's life, hear this. The power isn't in changing their label for you. It's in realizing you are the only one who gets to write the caption. You can spend a lifetime trying to correct the footnote they assigned you, or you can write a whole new book where you are the title. I chose the book, and on the page I'm writing today, there is no other one. There's just me, the architect, finally home. This story is mine, but the pattern it reveals is not unique to me. Research shows that between 40 and 65% of people raised with siblings report experiencing parental favoritism. That's millions of people who know what it is to be measured on a different scale, to have their love rationed, to hear their independence praised while their heart is quietly breaking. If you are one of them, I want you to know something the statistics don't capture. Being the other one is not a reflection of your worth. It is a reflection of a family system, often built on unhealed wounds, misplaced dreams, or simple human frailty. A parent's inability to see you clearly is not a verdict on your luminosity. It's a limitation of their own vision. They are looking at you through a lens clouded by their own history, their own disappointments, their own narrow story of what love and success should look like. The great and terrible work of your life is to clean your own lens, to see yourself without the filter of their favoritism, to separate the truth of who you are from the fiction of who they needed you to be. This doesn't always mean dramatic confrontations or final, fiery breaks. Sometimes it means the quiet, daily decision to stop auditioning for a role in a play you never wanted to be in. To take your love, your ambition, your care, and invest it in people and pursuits that give a return on that investment. The family you come from is your origin story. It is not your destiny. You get to build what comes next. You can build it with them if they are willing to meet you on new ground with new rules. Or you can build it beside them in peaceful parallel. Or, if necessary, you can build it a safe distance away, where their weather doesn't reach your foundation. All of those are acts of love, love for the self that was told it wasn't enough. My father's words at that dinner were a gift. A cruel, painful gift, but a gift nonetheless. They were the truth, spoken aloud. And truth, no matter how ugly, is always the solid ground you can finally build on. You cannot fix a problem everyone insists isn't there. But when the problem announces itself in front of 300 witnesses, the path forward becomes clear. You stop trying to fix the old foundation. You pour a new one. So look at your own life. Where are you begging for a seat in a car that has no room for you? Where are you mistaking their inattention for a challenge to try harder, instead of seeing it as information about where not to pour your energy? Your worth is not a prize they get to award. It is your inherent, unchangeable reality. You do not find it in their approval. You demonstrate it in the life you choose to live without it. This channel is dedicated to stories like these, stories of quiet revolutions, of reclaimed narratives, of people who built a future when the past offered them no blueprint. If this story resonated with you, If you saw a piece of your own journey in these moments, then you are not alone. This is your invitation to a different kind of family, a community of people who understand that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is to walk away from the dinner table and build a feast of your own. Subscribe for more stories of resilience, of boundaries, of the complex architecture of the human heart. Share your own experiences in the comments below. Tell us, where are you in your journey? Are you still at the table, hearing the label? Are you walking toward the door? Or are you out in the fresh air, finally building something that bears your true name? Remember, you were never the other one. You were always the main character, waiting for your own story to begin. Now go write it.